of the International Convocation of Unitarian Universalist Women, or IWC, I warmly welcome all to our event titled Climate Smart Strategies, Creating Bold Bolivian Women. IWC is a nonprofit organization in special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council, focusing on global women's rights and empowerment. Led by Unitarian or Unitarian Universalist women from around the world, IWC advances equity for women and girls worldwide through leadership development, empowerment, programs, advocacy, and resources. It partners with women's groups and other grassroots groups, organizations, and NGOs to implement locally based programs. Current and past programs have included Bolivia, Hungary, India, Kenya, the Philippines, Romania, Uganda, and the US. Please go on our website, intlwomensconvo.org, to find out more. The co-moderators of today's event are Reverend Carol Houston and Julie Steinbach. But first, we'd like to welcome Bruce Knotts, Director of the Unitarian Universalist Association office at the UN, whose office is co-sponsoring this event. Bruce will say a few words.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words, and I'll try to make them as few as possible. I've said on many occasions that women's rights are not just for women, they're for everybody. Anytime women are in responsible positions of authority, we all benefit. The world is a better place when women are involved and involved in meaningful ways. Certainly what we're about to hear about the women in Bolivia and what you women have done in Bolivia is absolutely amazing and astounding. And I look forward to learning more. I know something about what they're doing already, but I'm looking forward to more of that. The IWC is definitely part of a small collection of UU organizations that are working internationally for a better world for us all. And I'm very happy that our office at the United Nations is able on many occasions to partner together with the International Women's Convocation. So I look forward to today's presentation, as I always do, to presentations by the IWC, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. My name is Reverend Carol Houston. I am a retired Unitarian Universalist minister. I live in New York City. I have been, yes, retired from parish ministry, but I do a lot of work on advocacy for women worldwide, and for issues related to global health and global basic education. I have been involved with International Women's Convocation since before the organization was born. I was on the steering committee for the first convocation that was held in Houston, Texas in 2009. And that convocation gave rise to this organization, which has been active since 2010. I live in New York City, as does Bruce, and the buildings of the United Nations rest on the ground in New York. And this is land that was taken from the Lenape nation 15 or 20 generations ago. Other people that you are going to hear from today, you've already heard from Karen, you're going to hear from Julie. They live on lands taken from Potawatomi, Kickapoo, and Tongva nations. We will be listening to people speaking about and speaking from Bolivia this morning, this afternoon, this evening. And that is land that is home to 36 indigenous nations. And those are indigenous voices that still are heard as they make an effort to remain active in decision-making for Bolivia. The mission of the International Women's Convocation has been outlined for you. Very important in that mission is the idea that we would network together, that women of the global north would talk to each other, and women in the global south would also be teaching us and being with us, and we would work together on projects, that are true to the land where the projects are being put together. In order to do that, we have had some face-to-face convocations and face-to-face gatherings in various places in the world. We have had convocations in the United States, in Hungary, and we have visited for smaller gatherings, Philippines and Bolivia. We had an event in Bolivia in 2015. It brought almost 30 women from the global north and centered on more than 32 women from Bolivia who were gathered together. We were together for 3 days in a wonderful, wonderful place. We shared information, we shared ideas, we shared spiritual grounding, we shared food, we shared games, we laughed together, we learned from each other over those 3 days. It was a wonderful time of being together. One of the most important elements of that gathering were some small group sessions in which we talked about our priorities. We talked about our priorities as women. We talked about our priorities as women from where we were from. And we talked about our priorities for the world and how we could be active in making the world better for women and for men and for Indigenous people. It was a wonderful time of putting things together. And we looked at our priorities, listening always to the voices of the people from the place where we were, from Bolivia. And the priorities for action that came forward were, for one thing, they recognized the need for leadership training, to work together themselves to devise leadership training that they could give to women around them. And in fact, that has happened. There is a leadership school operating in a village north of La Paz at this moment. And other leadership schools have been the priority of women in Hungary and Philippines and other places. But the other priority was a surprise to those of us from the global north. It was climate. The women from Bolivia were really clear that climate change and the issues of climate justice were women's issues for them, something that they wanted to work on. And water was a particular difficulty for them in Bolivia. We talked a lot about that, learned a lot about that. That learning, that teaching is going to happen today as we hear from three people about how Bolivian women look at climate wisdom and what we can do with it. I am going to turn this over to my co-moderator, Julie Steinbach, who will introduce herself and then also introduce in turn the speakers as they come forward. Thank you. Welcome. It's good to have all of you here with us.
Hi, I'm Julie Steinbach. I live in Claremont, California on stolen Tongva land. And I am a retired teacher from a career in the California prison system, which is yet a whole nother anthropological culture. Back in 1973, when I was hired, I was the first woman hired in an all-male institution, which thrust me into women's leadership positions and programs during the course of my career, as well as other women's programs and activities, including with the United Nations Association and our local chapter. I've been involved with IWC since the 2012 Transylvania conference that Carol mentioned, and I'm currently serving as the outreach coordinator. Our program this morning will start with Helga Gruberg Cazón. Helga is an environmental engineering graduate of the Bolivian Catholic University, San Pablo, in Cochabamba, Bolivia, where she now teaches and conducts research in the Department of Exact Sciences and Engineering. She's worked in the design and implementation of sustainable development projects in Bolivia with the Gaia Pacha Foundation. That work led her to deepen her knowledge in social science by acquiring a master's degree in development and rural information at the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands. She's also worked as an international consultant in various development and research projects around climate change, food sovereignty, agrobiodiversity, and fair trade. Helga is also currently a doctoral student and fellow at the University of Ghent in Belgium in the Department of Agricultural Economics, where the central theme of her doctoral research is the co-construction of food sovereignty with a case study in the municipality of Tiraque in Cochabamba area. Bienvenidos, Profesora Gruberg Cazón. Vamos a Bolivia.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Julie, for the presentation. So I will start sharing my screen. So let's give it a, okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. And today I will be talking about power relations, women, and rural development. But first, it's very important to acknowledge the role that people play, that women play in agriculture, because they produce between 60 and 80% of the food. However, 3/4 of all the work that women do is unpaid. So women depend directly on natural resources to sustain their livelihoods. For example, they are the primary responsibles of supplying water and firewood, as well as growing food. However, the majority of the population is living in poverty, and they are exposed to greater risk and burdens. Here we can see a lady that is putting some firewood to be able to cook. So the natural resources that women depend on and are highly impacted by climate change, such as water and biomass for cooking, and the distances they need to travel to bring water to their homes in rural areas are increasing because of climate change. And it's important to know that the consequences of climate change are not the same for everybody. And as we know, women are the most affected. And because they don't have a permanent income, as I mentioned before, so they highly depend on humanitarian aid for housing, for health, and for food. And here in the picture, we can see the precarious situations they have to live when, for example, there's a flood. And despite the situation, this precarious situation they live in, they're responsible of ensuring that children and the elderly are well fed and cared for. And despite that women are the most affected by climate change, they had the least representation in decision-making spaces. So when we think about the construction of public policies related to natural resources or development projects, there's a tendency to assume that they follow a very linear process of first identifying a need, then developing a proposal, implementing it, and then doing an evaluation. However, there are a lot of power relations involved that interact with people's interests, agency, and knowledge, for example. So if we oversee power relations, the empowerment that we are aiming for may not occur. Because it's possible that some actors may end up dominating the process. And the people, the vulnerable and marginalized people may end up being even excluded. So it's important to identify power imbalances from the beginning of the process until the end to try to level up the floor for everybody. And this is very, very common in development projects in rural areas. And because of this, it has been called the tyranny of the participative approach by Bollens and Hohendam. So when we think about power relations, there's also a tendency to assume that it has a negative connotation of domination. However, there are many types of power, and only the power over has a negative connotation of domination of one group or organization over another one. So doing a power analysis is a very enriching learning process. And it helps us to understand the forms of power that reinforce poverty. And moreover, it can help us to avoid conflict. And finally, we can try to actually achieve the empowerment of these vulnerable groups. So there are many types of tools to be able to do a power analysis. And I will show you this, that is the power cube that I have been using, and it has different levels. It has forms of power, and I am going to look for the, here. So we have forms of power, and one of them is visible power. That is the kind of obvious kind of power. Is about who's making the decisions. And then we have hidden power, and hidden power is about who's setting the agenda and whose interests are being kept, and which actors are actually influencing the process behind of the public eye. But it's actually also about agency, in the sense that the people that are not involved and are the least powerful and are against a process or a public policy, for example, are able to confront it, to contestate it, okay? And then we have invisible power. Invisible power is about norms and values that will define what is acceptable, in the sense that maybe we don't participate in a process, but in our community is defined that we accept what our authorities decide. So that's invisible power. Then we have spaces. We have closed spaces. There are spaces where only elite groups are making the decisions without the participation of the people. And then we have invited spaces that are more participatory, and they actually want to involve the people. And they are led by NGOs and by the state. And then we have claim spaces. And again, claim spaces are about agency. And remember, it's about these people that contestate a public policy, for example, or a decision-making process that they weren't part of. And that contestation by itself is a claim space. And then we have levels. It could be local, national, or global. For example, a person that has a visible kind of power at a local space may not have the same power at a global scale. So I will try to show you how I use this tool in a case study in Tiraque, where they have a lot of problems related to water, like water distribution, pollution, overexploitation, and so on. Because of all these problems, the stakeholders, a lot of stakeholders, decided to create a public policy for the protection of water sources and water recharge areas. But before I explain the process of power relations that happen, I have to start by explaining how social organizations work in Bolivia. And well, we start with the agrarian unions, and a group of agrarian unions makes a subcentral, cantons, provincias, then we have departmental federations, and then we have the national confederation, okay? And from all of these levels, the most important is the provincial, because a lot of important decisions are made at this level. For example, the candidates running for MAS, el Movimiento al Socialismo, for mayor, for example, they are chosen at this level. So it's just to show you how important are these guys. So let's start. So visible power, and remember, it's about who makes the decisions. And here is who has the power. So we have the provincial, as I told you, we have the mayor, and then we have the municipal council. And these guys, the provincial, actually have more visible power than everybody else, because whatever they decide or ask for is highly probable that the mayor and the council are going to abide by it. And then it's about who makes the decisions. And in this case, a local NGO drafted a proposal of the public policy in Spanish and socialize it at a very high level. And it was supposed to go down to the grassroots, but this didn't happen because it was written in Spanish and in a very technical way. And most of the population, they speak Quechua. So the information couldn't go down. So this generated a lot of confusion and distrust. And then we have to talk about whose voices are present but have a little influence. And this was the case specifically of women. Women were present throughout the whole process, but their participation was a bit invisible and they didn't have much of a voice and a vote. So this generated even more distrust. So we go to the next, that is hidden power, and it's about who sets the agenda. So remember these guys, right? But it's not these guys, it was actually an NGO. An NGO managed to include the construction of this public policy in the agendas of the social organizations, the mayor and the municipal council. So the NGO has hidden power. And then we have to talk about the people that are not part of the process or are less powerful or are against the process, how they challenge it. And in this case, it was a group of irrigators. It's not that they were against the policy, but it was more that they were afraid of the content of the policy because they didn't quite understand it. And they were afraid that they were going to lose the power of control they have over not only water, but in general about natural resources. And what they say is like, okay, you have to freeze the process. They told the Provincial, freeze the process. And what we want is a pilot project where we can see the actual impact of such a policy. And then we can make a decision. So at the end of the day, it's actually the irrigators that also have hidden power. And last is invisible power. And remember, it's about norms and values. So here we have a quote. It was not possible to reach the totality of the grassroots. They may be dissatisfied, but they will abide by the established, because in Bolivian rural communities, there's a sense of community, it's a very strong sense of community rather than as an individual. So as we can see, it's very important to step away from a linear process and go more for a collaborative governance kind of process where we have cycles and we have feedback loops. And also to follow a standpoint theory point of view, where we can have a biased selection of stakeholders with a special focus on marginalized groups to make sure that these actors, vulnerable and marginalized actors, have actually a voice and a vote, and that they are present. So it says do a biased selection. So what we can see is that power relations really matter. And if we don't consider them throughout the whole process, they may change the result that we are expecting, and it actually could generate conflict and not empower people. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helga. That was particularly interesting to me from the perspective of describing the issues of power, agency, and spaces. We as women certainly can identify how we have been limited in those areas. And you also point out that through community and collaboration, we can overcome the biases of our inherent in living in our gender. And we women are definitely good at community and collaboration. So thank you for lifting those up. We now move to Erin Beasley. Erin serves as the President and Executive Director of Ecosystem Restoration Camps USA, which supports restoration activities that are part of the global ecosystem restoration camps movement. Currently based in Mexico City, Erin's 15 years of sustainable development have focused on experience in more than 10 countries in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Her previous work with Conservation International was notable for her work to include nature as a priority for national climate action under the Paris Agreement. We first met Erin when she came to the 2015 IWC Bolivia gathering in the Yungas Valley near Carayaco. In fact, she was my roommate. She came with several colleagues from the Gaia Pacha Foundation in Cochabamba, where Helga was connected. And she was the climate change program coordinator for Gaia Pacha. For her work, she received a Gruber Fellowship for Global Justice and Women's Rights in Cochabamba, where she designed, implemented, and evaluated capacity building programs for women farmers on climate change, adaptation, and agroecology. Erin holds a master's degree from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies with a focus on agricultural resilience to climate change. She also worked as the program officer for the Tropical Resources Institute and has supported country delegations at climate negotiations and carried out opportunity analysis for REDD+ in Mexico. REDD stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, a framework of the United Nations framework, UNFCCC, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, to guide activities in the forest sector. Lots of acronyms, lots of experience. Bienvenidos, amiga Erin. I'm quite delighted that our paths intersect again. We're all ready now to zoom along with you on your presentation path. Erin Beasley.
Thank you so much, Julie. And are you able to see my presentation? Great. Great. So in 2010, I lived in Cochabamba on and off for about 7 years. And as Julie mentioned, I want to share with you one project that I developed with partners at Gaia Pacha to support women farmers who are already facing the impacts of climate change. So in the next 12 minutes, we'll barely skim the complexity of the project or of the place, but I want to bring you a little further into the how of project design for engaging a community or group, particularly around shared learning. So this is specific to Bolivia, but I think that it can also apply in some other settings. And I also want to thank and share my appreciation for my colleagues who developed this with me, Marcelo Reinaga Heredia, Andrea Vargas Elio, and Fabiana Paz Arnés, who were very involved in the development and implementation of these activities.
Erin, your notes are covering your slides.
I see. Okay, let me see if I can switch that.
There
it
you
might
go.
take me a second. Hang on 1 second. Aha, okay. Well, you guys can see now that.
Yep.
There we go.
Good picture, thanks.
Okay. Well, now you know more or less what I'm going to say. So before we get started on any project, let me just make sure I can scroll down in this. Great. That is related to justice, I really recommend spending some time to reflect on why you care about that particular issue. Why do you have a stake in it? Why is it personal to you? For me, it's a story about gardening. I grew up in the woods around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my mom made these beautiful vegetable gardens where she taught us to grow food and to give us the best nutrition that she could. We would bring the food in from the garden and cook our meals. It was really a beautiful part of my growing up. And one day when I was about 16 or 17, I came home from school and the landlord's tractor was sitting on top of the garden. It was totally destroyed. And for me, it wasn't just the loss of the plants in that particular moment, but it was the loss of our time and sharing as a family that really mattered to me. It was about our identity of who we were, who I was, and my relationship to the environment around me. And I bring up this example because when farmers are impacted by climate change, whether that's a drought or a flood, it's not just the loss of the crops that matters, which is what we often think of first. It's about the family, it's about the farmer themselves, it's about their relationship to their place, to their neighbors, to their community. They're the ones who are out there responding to the floods or droughts or early frosts that come with changing climate. And this social importance of this phenomenon is really what motivates me to do the continued work to support farmers in different contexts and in different places around the world to be more resilient to climate change. So if you haven't already, I really encourage you to spend some time to do some of the personal work to understand what really motivates you personally when you're thinking about your support for issues of justice for women. It helps to clarify your participation and also helps to guide how you engage on this topic in a deep and caring way. And then I also want to share a little bit about the guidance, the frameworks that guide me in developing workshops with a community or a group. For me, those are community art, which is this idea of non-artists participating in a creative process of making a mural or an installation. And this really brings out a process of connecting with self. Design thinking, which is a way of resolving problems rather than coming up with the perfect answer the first time and then sticking with that. Exploring many different types of problems, trying them out, making some adjustments, creating prototypes and iterating those potential solutions, and then narrowing down into something you actually want to end up using at the end.
Erin, we saw your slides before, so I know the group isn't seeing what you were just talking about. Can you advance your slides?
Can you see slide number 2, guidance?
We're just seeing
Oh.
women farmers right now.
I see. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. And then complex adaptive systems is this idea that both social and ecological systems don't operate in a straight line. They don't have directly linear cause and effect relationships. It's a different way of thinking about the world around us, where we have multiple components in a system that influence each other, that are dynamic and changing themselves, and that those interactions influence the outcome of a political process or an ecological process. I've also mentioned a couple of other writers and thinkers here that have been influential to me. So I'll let you check those out if you want to see a little bit more about any of those frameworks. Let's see what else here. And why do we focus on women on these workshops? First, because women face some of the biggest climate impacts from climate change, more than other social groups, because women grow the food. Helga mentioned both of these. And because in this case, in this particular place, women occupy one of the key spaces that is important to having food during times of scarcity, which is the home garden. So you see here that it says gendered spaces. And this is what I mean, that in families or neighborhoods or cultures, some spaces are affiliated with a gender. We often think about gender roles as belonging to a particular person. But in Bolivia, home gardens are a gendered space. That doesn't mean that the home gardening is exclusively for women, but it has a gender affiliation. So when we offered workshops on home gardens, what we ended up getting were participants who were mostly, but not always, women. And then here below, I put a phrase called social weaving. In the social context, there's an aspect to women's relations that is about weaving the shared social fabric. And this happens during difficult times, and it also happens during kind of times of stability. And that includes things like sharing news, resolving conflicts together, sometimes creating conflicts in order to get change. In this way, reaffirming spaces like a home garden is also a reaffirmation of spaces for information sharing that happens during this social weaving process. So now that you have a little bit of background about, let's see if we can go down one more. Here we go. About why we're here and where this knowledge comes from and this focus on women, what did the actual workshops look like? We had conversations with each of the women about their home gardens, each of the participants about their home gardens, for them to identify problems, existing knowledge that they had, what was being grown there. And we developed with our agroecology facilitator a series of workshops that responded to these problems, so that each workshop was based around a particular problem that some members of the group were experiencing in their garden, and then offering a potential solution, and then also using that space to discuss among the participants other solutions that were in use for that particular issue. So we held workshops on topics like pest and disease management, increasing soil fertility, diversifying the varieties grown in the garden, creating seedling nurseries, how to install drip irrigation during times of drought, and interestingly here, pruning, which is another example of a gendered activity. So the participants requested the workshop, but on the day of the workshop, none of the women who had been participating in these activities for several months arrived. But there was a group of men ready to join. So it turns out that in Bolivia, pruning fruit trees is an activity that's managed primarily by men. So even though the trees were in the home garden, which is this gendered space, they had a role in that space. And so the women participants made sure that someone from their household attended in order to achieve the knowledge that they found to be important. So this is a picture of what some of those workshops look like. You can see there's a variety of different activities that are happening here, some different learning modalities, everything really hands-on and practical and actually implementing the activity together. So what were some learnings from this process that we observed? First, it's really important to use the first language. This should be obvious, but somehow it is a recurring theme that it seems to be not obvious. So especially for this type of educational or problem-solving work, when you're engaging people often in their own home, it's really important to know what language people use in their home and work with a facilitator to develop the workshops in that language. And then I've also noted here, I have a long list, but also sharing back. So as an example, it seems small, but even pictures that you might take for documentation and storytelling, take the time and print them and find an appropriate way to give them to participants so that that story also belongs to them. And they can use that documentation to share their own stories in their own way. So what do we try, what's the overall goal of or outcome that we're looking for in doing these activities? It is this idea of resilience, which for us, going through this process, we found is not so much the knowledge or the learning that occurs, but strengthening the capacity to learn, which is a slightly different thing than the knowledge itself. And to strengthen opportunities for innovation, practical innovation, information sharing between participants about what's going on in their production, and the practical experience of actually trying some of these new techniques, adapting them and implementing them in their context. And then finally, how do we grow this resilience further? I think networking events or opportunities for participants to join larger meetings, farmer to farmer exchange, where the participants can go to a different community and exchange some of their experiences, or even at the scale of the event where the Women's Convocation organized to bring women together in Bolivia is really a powerful part of that social weaving that I mentioned earlier. And then also the leadership of women in decision-making spaces, as Helga mentioned, at the local or municipal level, and also really importantly at the national and international delegations. So I think you'll hear a little bit of that too from Carmen. And also importantly, supporting women farmers, especially in their access to capital in order to do their activities and land access, and paying with money and other types of value for the work that women are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. And now we move to Carmen Capriles. First I want to say thank you, Erin, for pointing out several things that really stuck with me. One was the idea of questioning, identifying for oneself why you care. When you told that story about the tractor when you were a little girl, it brought up for me a story that I hadn't actually connected with my own love of trees, but of how trees were torn out of the parkway in front of my family home in Mayville, Wisconsin, back when I was a child. And I don't remember any articulation from my parents, but I remember the deep pain that we all felt and that has carried with me whenever a tree needs to be cut down. So thank you for that. And also the other articulation that you gave with the social weaving. That's what we're doing here with IWC. And I just love having that term. We women have always been weavers, and we're continuing to do it with our networking and our weaving right here, even on Zoom. And now we zoom over to Carmen Capriles, our third presenter today. Carmen is a feminist and environmental activist, organizer, and advocate who lives in La Paz, Bolivia. She founded and has directed the volunteer organization for the past 10 years, Reacción Climática, with the aim to raise awareness about environmental problems like the melting of the glaciers in the Andean mountains. I first met Carmen in La Paz just before we all went to the Yungas Valley for the conference in 2015. I remember clearly her expression of pain, almost tears, at seeing the snow line receding on Illimani, the second highest peak in Bolivia, and the especially iconic and revered mountain rising gloriously above La Paz. Reacción Climática also promotes the conservation of biodiversity, the importance of protected areas, and particularly focuses on the impact of climate change on vulnerable populations, such as exposing the impacts of chemicals on women, like pesticides in agriculture or mercury from mining. On the larger stage, Carmen advocates for women's rights and gender equality in processes like UNFCCC, United Nations Framework of Climate Change, Framework Convention on Climate Change Convention. She participated in the Paris Climate Summit in 2015, CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, HLPF, the UN High-Level Political Forum, UNEA, UN Environmental Assembly in Nairobi. She's also a promoter of the Ikazu Agreement, the new treaty that deepens the link between environmental protection and human rights in Latin America and the Caribbean. Carmen concluded her studies as agriculture engineer at the University of San Andres in Bolivia. She also specialized in sustainable rural development at EICA, the Egyptian International Center for Agriculture in Cairo. We're thrilled, Carmen, to join you again in La Paz.
Well, hello everybody. Greetings from La Paz. We are here in the middle of the Andes. It's a little bit cold today, but I'm really happy to be with you and to share a little bit about my experience working from global to local and vice versa. I'm going to share my screen. I hope everybody can see it. Well, today I'm going to talk a little bit more about climate change and peace building, and from global to local, to see how these two terms kind of like engage and how the struggle is going around to fight climate change, because as Julia mentioned, and Helga and Erin, it's one of the main problems that we're facing here in Bolivia. Well, my work has been focused on sustainable development, and basically my two favorite SDGs are peace, justice, and strong institutions, and climate action. So, well, as we all know, in 2015, we approved the Paris Agreement, which states that the temperature shouldn't rise more than 2 degrees. But we still have that question, When we have like a fever, 40 degrees fever, is it possible for us to function? Is it possible for us to keep a normal life? And I think that's a question that we have to ask ourselves when we talk also about the climate, about the planet and the climate. And I also believe, I'm a strong believer that sustainable development is one of the ways. But when we start seeing like the numbers, for example, many of you should know that what 350 is, 350 parts per million of CO2 is the amount of CO2 that would keep the temperature of the planet in the optimal state for life to thrive. Right now we are over 400, but the last time we had 350 parts per million in this planet was ironically the year the Sustainable Development term was defined as the kind of development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And here we have a small chart to see to talk about the carbon budget per generation to achieve the 2 degrees. And here we have the generation of our parents. This one is basically my generation from 1991 to 2011 that we've been using resources at unprecedented ranges. And well, we are right now using this part. We are also being so thirsty of resources that we really don't care much, especially about the next generations. So these are the kind that the carbon budget our kids will have. And this is the carbon budget for next generations until 254. So it's not that much. And what's happening right now? Well, many people say that, oh, humankind cannot change so much the planet in order to generate climate change. But when we see this picture, I think it's very obvious how humans have already changed the surface of the planet. And it's important to see this because all this, the parts that have light are the ones that are using like the more energy. And there are cities that we can that we can clearly identify. And we live here, this small dot, which is not surrounded by many light. This is where I am right now. This is Cochabamba, where Erin used to live, and Helga also. And this is Santa Cruz. And you can see that it's quite dark compared to other places in the world. And in the other hand, we have the map showing us the wildfires. So here's the Amazon burning, here's Australia burning. A couple of years ago, you have seen the koalas, for example, and this is how Africa burns. And all this in order to have more land, to have more soybean, more palm oil, and more cattle for still keeping our demands satisfied. So this is the burning of the forest in the Amazonian forest in Bolivia, which is the Chiquitania. Each one of these dots is one of, there are huge fires. Many of them reach like 30 square kilometers. 2019, I spent 40 days turning down these fires, which is almost impossible because they are so big. You cannot see them. You cannot know where it's beginning or where it's ending. But we know that eventually all this forest is going to be gone. And what does that mean for us in the Andean region? Well, most of our water depend on the glaciers, the Andean glaciers, especially here. Well, I'm in La Paz in over 12,000 feet above sea level. So we're very far away from the ocean. And yeah, our main source of water are these glaciers. So this is one of the activities that we do with Reacción Climática, which is the Andean walks. We go to the glaciers, we go to the mountains to see what's going on and to kind of like witness. So it's not something that somebody's telling us, but it's something that we are experiencing. And we have a team of specialists that are helping us explain and raise awareness about this process. And we partner with, for example, an organization called Mujer Montaña, or Women of the Mountain, who they do some sports on the mountain, like rock climbing, like mountain hiking, and so on. And yeah, they are experts that do manage the issue, and they are explaining how climate change is affecting the Andes. So here's one example. This is Illimani. It's the mountain that Julie just mentioned. And this is 2013, and this is 2017. And we can bare sight see how much of the glacier has already kind of like melted. So it's the perfect example for me, because I see the Illimani like every day from where I live. This is another example. I hope you can see like the top of this mountain. It's here, and you can see this glacier, which is really thick and nice and white. And this is 2012 for a campaign of 350.org. And we went back on 2017, and you can see how it starts melting. And here you can see we are like in the same place. This is the top of the mountain also. You can see how deep the glacier was, that you could like, you couldn't feel the bottom. And in 2012, and in 2017, it's almost gone. And that's how the glaciers are melting. So that's why for me it's so important to fight for climate change, to achieve climate justice, and to try to raise awareness about this problem. And second, I want to talk a little bit about peace and justice, and especially around the Escazú Agreement, because these are some of the news in the paper that around environmental defenders. 2017 was the deadliest year for environmental activists, and then it was 2018, and we have all this kind of news about 7 human rights defenders killed in Guatemala, 46 human rights defenders killed in 2018, and these are the news that usually come from that it's becoming so now so common for us. And many of these environmental activists that are being killed are indigenous. 2 out of every 3 environmental defenders are indigenous, because they are trying to defend their land, they are trying to defend their territory, and there is conflict about companies, transnationals, and governments that want to get a hold on the resources. And the fight is so hard that environmental defenders are losing them. And you would think that probably the most dangerous place to talk about human rights would be like the Middle East or China or Russia, but actually the place where the most killings of environmental and human rights defenders is Latin America. And here are the numbers. You can see that this is 2017 compared worldwide. And yeah, the most killings are in Colombia and Brazil, even compared to countries that you would think are much worse in case of human rights. These are the killings in 2019. The one that I showed you was 2017. And we still have high numbers in South America. That's why we came up with the Escazú Agreement: access to information, access to participation, and access to environmental justice. And it's been a long road. Actually, I started advocating for this like before 2007. This was the first meeting, and it took us until 2018 to finally have this agreement. And you can see now, 2020, we have over 300 environmental defenders murdered. And we even have children that have been, that have threats of death, like this kid in Colombia, who is also, this year in 2021. And that's why we, for example, here we say that if Greta Thunberg would have been born in Latin America, she wouldn't exist anymore. And that's the reality that we're facing. And that's why it's important to keep on fighting, keep on guaranteeing the rights of the environmental leaders, because also it's important for the environment. The Amazon is one of the biggest carbon sinks in the planet. And to finalize, I want to show some of the faces of the women environmental defenders from here, from Bolivia. Silvia Lipa, she is from the Leco, the Leco people. Matilde Nosa, she's been fighting for Tifnis. I don't know if you heard of Tifnis. There was a march 10 years ago, but we're still fighting against a road that will go across an indigenous territory. Maria Luisa Rafael, she's an activist from Highlands. She's also complaining about water issues. And we have Ruth Lipa, who is an indigenous rights advocate here in Bolivia, and also that has been in a number of UN spaces also. Well, that would be it. Thank you. I hope I didn't exceed my time too much.
You were fine, Carmen. You're just perfect. Thank you very, very much. To all three of you, you have demonstrated how much women in Latin America have to teach us. Thank you for talking, giving your presentations in English. As Erin pointed out, it's often good to be in your own native language, but thank you for helping us to understand. When we were together in Bolivia in 2015, we had translators around, and even in informal places, so that people with English or Spanish native languages could understand one another. But it was wonderful to hear from the projects that Erin talked about, from the political work in a town that Helga shared, to those trips up to the mountains, those practical things that women can do. But also, I really enjoyed the political theory, the climate theory, the power relationship theory that you all shared with us today. Please put questions into the chat. We do have enough time to take some questions. And I'm going to start with a question in just a moment, but I do want to share one of the many things I've learned from Carmen since I got to know her first in Bolivia 6 years ago. She pointed out to me that it is inappropriate for people who come from the United States just to call themselves Americans, that there are Americans living in all the Western Hemisphere, and that the appropriate use of that term should be for all of us. And I have been jumping through verbal hoops ever since then, Carmen, trying to make sure that I never claim to be an American, but I claim to be a US person. And I'm glad that you put that thinking into my mind. The question that I would like to give to each of you to start things, and then Karen will bring us questions from the chat a little bit later. What is the next thing for you? What do you want to do next in relation to what you are learning, what you have been doing? What do you want to do? What's next for you? And then also, do you have suggestions for, given the skills and and wisdom that you've heard from your colleagues here on the panel, do you have any suggestions for what one of the others of them might do next? So who wants to start with that pair of questions?
So, so the question is what we want to do next?
Yes. What do you want to do next? And particularly in climate or climate justice or whatever you're doing, but what do you want to do next? And do you have a suggestion for either Erin or Carmen to do as they go forward?
Okay, so what I want to do next is, well, is to continue working, but with a focus on food sovereignty, because climate change and food sovereignty are very linked together, as well as human rights. So what we are working on and starting to work on is actually about, in this issue about policy, on the co-creation of public policy for food sovereignty with women from different ages and from different social groups. So I think that there's a lot of work to continue doing, no?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, there's so much to do. That's the reason I'm asking. How do you choose? So thank you, Erin. What about you?
Thanks. So I think next, I'm currently working with an organization that I helped to create called Ecosystem Restoration Camps. And I think as I've done this work related to climate change and resilience, and especially what in the US we call working lands, so forests, productive forests, and agriculture, it's become really clear that ecosystem functions that are happening kind of below the radar in most people's lives are actually really essential to supporting both human and ecological, other pretty much all living processes. So some of those functions are things like water infiltration and soil fertility, biodiversity. So a simple explanation would be that trees create oxygen for us to breathe. That's a function of the environment. Another is that when water passes through the land, it's filtered and brings us clean water through natural processes. All of these processes are going on in the background, and there's things that we as humans can do to value them, to make sure that we're not destroying those processes, and also to strengthen some of those. So this organization that we work with, that I work with, looks at different sites around the world that are protecting some of those ecosystem functions or ecosystem services. You see things like regenerative agriculture, systems like agroforestry, restoration of some of these broken functions, like the water cycle or the hydrology processes. And we look for partners around the world who are doing their agriculture or doing their forestry project with an understanding of what's going on in the background, and they're working to protect that. And I think that's really important for us to understand that relationship with nature and natural systems as we enter into a phase where the climate is becoming increasingly variable, because it's those systems that help to provide that resilience and help keep us healthy and safe.
Thank you, thank you. And Carmen, what's ahead for you? I know you are doing a lot with UN agencies. What's on the horizon for you?
Well, April 22, the Escazú agreement is going to enter into force, and then we have to work in the implementation to really see the tendency of the killings of the environmental activists shift. That is one of the main goals right now. So governments can guarantee the rights of environmental defenders. So that's one of the things. The other one is to, with the UN Environmental Assembly, we're working on a treaty for plastic, plastic is right now one of the biggest environmental problems that we have. Whether you're in the north or in the south, it is a problem, and we need to start taking it into account. And we hope that next year we can come with an agreement, a global agreement toward plastic, especially single-use plastic. And the other thing is that to keep on working on empowering people on these international agreements. Because what usually happens is that they think that the agreement or the agenda, it's like the job for UN, and people don't empower themselves in these agreements. And for me, it's really important that people get a hold on this. Anyone can support the Agenda 2030. It doesn't have to be an organization. It doesn't have to be part of the government. Any volunteer can help achieve it. And I think that's right now the ant work that we have to do so people learn what's the Paris Agreement, what are the contributions, what they can do to act for climate, what's the Agenda 2030, how we can help to achieve the Agenda 2030, how we can advocate for environmental issues, and so on. And especially with the Escazú Agreement, because environmental defenders need to know their rights and need to know that there is a guarantee that at least at the international level, there is something signed. And I would like to work to find governments accountable to stop the killings.
Is that the way the implementation will go? The governments will be held accountable for it? Or is that largely what will happen?
Yeah, sort of, because the governments right now have agreed to guarantee the rights of the environmental defenders, because the Escazú Agreement has in its core environmental defenders. So to kind of like stop these killings, and so international community can be aware that these killings are occurring.
Thank you. Yeah, it's important. I had not known much about this until you started talking about it a few weeks ago. But yes, and it's the work of the UN to hold governments accountable to those things. Yeah. Karen, do we have any questions in the chat? Oh, thank you, Karen.
Yeah, well, yeah, here's a map of everywhere that we work. We are going to get booted off of our Zoom room in a few minutes. So one of the questions was related to what Carmen's talking about. Why are environmental activists killed? Somebody asked. So why is it that environmental activists are killed?
In South America.
Oh, basically because of resources. In Latin America, gold is coming from Latin America, and you need gold for your wedding ring. So when a community says we don't want gold mining here, and then they will get rid of the head, so the rest of the community will accept that gold mining could happen there. They want to build a new dam in order to have more energy, and especially for exporting energy. So people will oppose, especially women's, because they don't want the river to have a dam. And then they will kill the leader. That's what happened with Berta Cáceres in Honduras in 2016. So all these killings are for resources. And the other ones in Brazil are because agro industry is growing. They need more land to produce more cattle, to produce more soybean, and they're killing the activists because they want to start using their land to produce, to have more cattle and to have more soybean or more palm oil. So every time you eat something from palm oil, you should be aware that there is deforestation happening, killing animals, killing lots of wildlife, but also killing environmental defenders. And yeah, those are the basic, but also we have poaching, well, agribusiness is one of the big ones, and big projects like from different governments that want to exploit the resources that Latin America still has, because the colony didn't took all of it, just in case. So capitalists wants to take the rest of it in these years, and that's why the killings are occurring, and that's why we have to, because many resources that are in indigenous people are putting in danger indigenous communities, especially like for oil or for gas and so on.
And even in Bolivia, which has an indigenous lead, or has had an indigenous leader, indigenous lands are not held, are not protected. Yeah.
Well, in Bolivia, we don't have killings as such, but there is something that we call civil killing, that when the government targets you, you cannot get a job, media won't talk to you, you don't have any chance of like doing anything in the country. And if you have like a source of income, then the government will come and take it from you. It's like, for example, one of my aunts, she was running a school, the government didn't like it, and the government kind of like bought the school from her. And yeah, it's the government is everywhere, so it's really hard to kind of like fight against it. And it has this international appearance to kind of like show, but the truth is that the ones that are suffering the most are especially people, indigenous people from lowlands, which is different from highlands, because of this situation of extractivism, that it's the main policy of the government.
Political and economic greed in all of this. We actually have until 3 o'clock. I think we have a few more minutes. So Karen, do you have other questions?
Yeah, I guess I miscalculated the time. So let me see where we are.
I can show you the video, which is 2 minutes.
Yes, I was wondering what happened to that video.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Please, to kind of like. Can you listen?
No, I think that you need to share with the...
Share the audio.
Yeah, audio.
No audio?
No, we don't have audio.
Okay, give me just 1 second. I'm sorry, I thought it was.
Here we go. That's okay.
El agua es vida. Donde no hay agua, no hay vida. Nosotros aquí vivimos de los pozos, sacamos de los pozos el agua, pero el agua ya no es bebible, ni siquiera los animales pueden beber. Todas las aguas en las minas que van bajando ríos abajo son las que alimentan el lago Popó. Todas esas situaciones las hemos ido demandando, denunciando en su momento, no hemos sido escuchados hasta que se ha secado el lago Popó. Después de 50, 40 años de contaminación necesitamos resarcimiento. Tienen que las empresas, los cooperativistas, reacondicionar la conducción de las aguas de mina, que no vayan directamente al río, todo amarillo, todo contaminado.
En esta comunidad nos encontramos sin trabajo. Nos ha abandonado nuestra madre tierra, nuestro Pachamama, nuestra Cota Maecota. Es como si la minera fuera una ametralladora y nos aniquilara a todos los comunales.
Es un sector productivo que no solamente mejora su situación económica, sino también mejora la economía nacional. ¡Que vivan las mineras y payeras de Bolivia! ¡Que viva Comín! ¡Que viva nuestro proceso de cambio! Muchas gracias.
Acá, hermano, el Illimane, en extensión, más de 10 empresas chinas dominan las explotaciones en Bolivia. Los químicos, explosiones están matando la montaña.
Nuevamente está queriendo ocurrir el saqueo de nuestros recursos naturales como en los tiempos coloniales. Y han capturado aguas subterráneas, más va a ir secando. Ya es basta.
Si hemos hecho nuestras denuncias, nuestras demandas a las Naciones Unidas, ¿a dónde más podemos ir? Lo que importa es que la tierra se ha secado, el lago se ha muerto, se han muerto los peces. ¿Y quién defiende todo esto?
Well,
Water.
thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That's very nice. So a question that is in the chat here. Let's see. If there were someone in each of our countries who we could press on this issue, what exactly would you want us to say and to whom? In other words, how do you think we can best apply pressure and to whom that would have most impact on the situation?
On the situation of environmental killings, I wonder.
No, as far as protecting the environment, I think.
Okay, okay.
Well, I think it begins with us. As soon as we start changing our attitudes and so on, but we have to also be aware that climate change is like 70% of climate change is caused by less than 50 companies, for example. So we have to be aware of what's going on, and we can change these little habits, like, for example, stop using single-use plastics, start recycling more, start using more efficient appliances, and so on. That's good. But we also need to be aware that there is these companies, and we have to work with our communities. So our communities can be aware of what's going on. And that way we kind of like escalate all this. But it's like watching the 17 goals and saying, I want to support in one. Can be gender equality, it can be the water and sanitation, it can be energy. We can all do something to support the achievement of the Agenda 2030. Education, for example. Education is something that we can all be involved, and especially at community level. So we have to stop thinking that somebody else is going to do it. Stop asking, who do we pressure so this happens? Because actually all of this is happening so we can be really comfortable and not have to think where my plastic bottle goes or where the gold of my ring is coming from.
We need to find our voices and help others find their voices as well. Any other thoughts on that score from Erin or Helga?
Well, on the same line as what Carmen is saying, it's actually, yes, it's very important to recognize our role, especially our role as people from urban centers, because most of the time we think that the people of the countryside are the ones that have to provide us with clean air, with clean water, with organic food, and then we forget our role as urban citizens. And yes, we have a role. And I want to say something about how happy I am that actually this event this year is online, because every time that we have these huge conferences and we have everybody going to the same place and traveling with planes and trains and blah, 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 it's quite a lot. The impact is quite high. And I know that networking in person is quite different of what we are doing today, but actually I have to say it, I am happy that these events throughout this year have been online.
Yes, the carbon footprint of all those flights to New York City is enormous. So yes, you're right. We are doing something simply by meeting online and learning in that way. Thank you.
I'd like to respond to the Chris Saw's question about what can we do about the killings, not just the environmental in general. One thing in the United States that's happening is that there's a Berta Cáceres Act that's been introduced in Congress by 7 or 8 senators to reduce the United States engagement in Honduras, which is what's causing a lot of these issues, the United States support. And so one thing that can be done is to encourage your senators and congressmen to support the Berta Cáceres Act.
Could you write that into the chat?
Yes.
Thank you, so that we can know how to, yeah. Let's not give up on any of these things that go to Congress. We need to keep pushing. We need to push on them. So that's very good. Thank you. Thank you, Julie.
Oh, yeah, I guess I did misinterpret his question. He was asking about the killings. Yeah, so Julie answered, but Carmen, what would you say would be the best way to be an activist as far as combating the killing and targeting of environmental activists?
Well,
Excuse me, activists.
It's important that people acknowledge where the products are coming from. To know if you're having beef like from Brazil, it's very probably that a great deal of the Amazon was burned, so you can have beef from the Amazon. If you have gold, you have to ask where the gold is coming from, and it's hard, like in Bolivia, because the gold, it's not, when it goes out, it doesn't say it comes from Bolivia, for example, and the best thing is to be aware of what's happening, like which companies are behind. Like, for example, when Unilever was burning Indonesia, and they sent you could see the commercial with the orangutan fighting the machinery to turn down the forest to have palm oil. That was kind of like a reaction, and people started asking Unilever to stop doing that, and Unilever had to put more restrictions on their processes. Still has not solved all the problems. Still, Unilever has a lot of this going on around the world, but it's Unilever, it's P&G, is what are other one, Nestle. Nestle, for example, chocolate from Côte d'Ivory, Ivory Coast. People in Ivory Coast had never tried chocolate, and they are producing it so Nestle can sell it. So there are those kinds of things that are going on worldwide, so we can have a very comfortable life, like most of the metals in our cell phones or in our computers. So it's great to be online, but it's also causing us carbon. We don't have to be naive that all these processes are not consuming carbon and resources. So one of the things is to be aware how much resources are we using, and be more responsible with the reuses of the resources that we use.
Pressure on the car. Yeah, yeah, thank you. And one last question, Karen, anything else?
Okay, well, this is, I don't know, intriguing. Somebody wants to know if Carmen has any thoughts on the asparagus violations in Peru.
Sorry?
I don't know what that means either.
I think they are talking of the impact. There's a huge impact of the production of asparagus in Peru regarding water. I think maybe that's it, but I am not sure.
Okay, so that's not something, yeah, you know a lot about. Okay.
Asparagus, no, but I can talk about avocado and the impact it has on water worldwide.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. We're hearing that. Yeah.
Can I share my screen a few minutes?
Sure.
This is the 50 companies that are responsible for 60 63% of gas emissions. And we have the oil company of China, Saudi Arabia, Gazprom, and so on. And then we have Mobile, and then we have Shell, and so on. So these are the companies.
We're not seeing your screen.
What?
We're not seeing your screen.
How come? I thought you were seeing. Oh no, something happened. I cannot.
Okay, but you're listing the corporations that are the
Yeah, I wanted to share the graphic. It's from the Carbon Disclosure Project NGO. You can probably Google it. But yeah, my computer just froze.
Okay. We're coming up on the end of our time. Any last words from it? I am just blown away by the wisdom that has come together here. Thank you so much, Carmen and Erin and Helga. I'm going to spend a lot of time sort of taking all this in, and I trust everyone else will be doing that too. But any last words from any of you? If not, Karen, would you please put up the map again? Can you do that?
Sure.
This is a map.
Okay, hang on. I gotta stop Carmen sharing. We seem to be frozen. It won't.
All right. Well, what we saw before was a map of the countries in the world where International Women's Convocation has projects. Romania, the Transylvania section of Romania, we have been doing leadership school and domestic.
Here you go.
All right, there we are. In Romania, we have been doing leadership. No, we don't do. We enable a network around the projects that are done. And in Romania, it's leadership schools and domestic violence training in India and other kinds of educational projects. In Kenya, we are partnering with another organization to do work with women in villages. Bolivia, you've heard about. In the Philippines, domestic violence projects, education projects. And we have a project in the United States on the Texas border with Mexico about immigrants and immigrants in detention. We'll see you next year. International Women's Convocation we are expanding and hoping to be in touch with a lot of areas of the world. And we'll be at CSW next year, I hope in part, as Helga says, it is online so that we don't all have to fly to New York, but I'm in New York and I'm fine with seeing people face to face if you're coming here. So thanks to all of you. It has been wonderful being with you on this last day of CSW 65. And again, thanks to Helga, to Erin, to Carmen, for all the wisdom that they have provided with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. And it was a delight to share, seeing like there's people from Nigeria, there's people from Brazil, and from everywhere. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias por todo.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias to you. Yeah. So, yes, thank you.
I think, Julie, you have to end the webinar because it lists you as the primary host.
Oh.
Do you see in the bottom corner, does it say end meeting?
I do. Do you get to save the chat box, Karen?
I think it'll come with the recording.
Because I'm actually trying to copy and to paste it into.
Okay, well, we can leave this open then. I mean, I can always trim this off the tape. You can.
Yeah, my copying function is just almost done, and then as soon as it's done, then I'll okay, copy. All right. Bye, everybody. This was
great job, everyone. Thank you. Great job. Wow. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sorry, apologize.